We're here in the depths of the John Curtin Gallery on the Curtin campus in Bentley, looking at the Herbert Mayer Koorliny collection. You can see some of it behind us. It's a collection of 122 works by children from the stolen generation who were based at the Koorliny camp near Katanning. And I'm here with Chris Malcolm to tell me more about it. You have walking tours coming up of this collection.
Correct, yeah, we got one coming up this week and scheduling them every month now.
So tell us about Koorliny. Where is it and what was it?
Koorliny, it's about 300 kilometres south of Perth, and it's a site that had been a gathering meeting place for Noongar people for thousands of generations before settlement. And at the beginning of the 20th century, it was established as a place to remove the population of Aboriginal people from the reserve at Katanning, and became the very first native settlement in Western Australia, which is a place where the government could kind of control where people were and control their movements. And it evolved over time into the Marriebank Mission in the mid 1950s, which was operating up until the 1980s. So it was almost a century of, as a place of confinement and segregation. So
the people there weren't treated very well initially. How did these artworks then come about from a place that's an internment camp?
Yeah, the principal decade of activity was the 1940s, so from 40 to 50. And the first half of that decade, the children had suffered greatly. It was kind of rejuvenated in 1939, 1940 as a place of assimilation. So it was very overcrowded. Children, there was no electricity. Children were locked up in their dormitories at night. So it was this sort of strange situation where they were being given an education, supposedly to give them an opportunity to assimilate into society, and yet they didn't really have the opportunities that any other child of their age did at the time, because the boys were destined to become farm labourers and the girls were destined to become domestic servants. So there was a kind of sad irony about, so-called opportunity and assimilation. And in the middle of that decade, a family arrived to take over the duties as headmaster and teacher at the school, and these artworks were the result of the interaction between that couple and the children. We've seen artworks that were made in the classroom before 1946, and they don't look anything like these landscape works.
Now, these artworks, though they were created in Katanning, they haven't been in Katanning for this entire time. Where have they been?
They've been all over the place. There was an English woman in Perth in 1949 who just accidentally come across the existence of the artworks being produced at the school, and by then they had been being produced since the beginning of 1946. And the children had exhibited them sort of in various places in Western Australia to great acclaim. And this English woman ended up taking some back to London, and throughout 1950 was sent further bundles of hundreds of drawings at a time and staged exhibitions right across the UK, 23 exhibitions in 2 years. And the collection of 122 are what remain of the 1,000 plus works that were sent to her in 1950. So she was exhibiting them. She'd set up a foundation with the government here where the proceeds of sales could come back to Western Australia and go back to Koorliny for the children's benefit for their education. But the whole thing came to a crashing halt at the end of 1950 when the school was abruptly closed, shut down. All the children were dispersed to other missions and settlements, and the kind of enterprise of making the artworks ground to a halt.
And then what happened with these works?
The next step was that Florence had these works that were remains of the 1,000 that were otherwise sold in exhibitions, and they were then sold at the end of her life. She was quite ill in the mid-1950s. She sold them to a collector in New York by the name of Herbert Mayer. He donated them to his alma mater, which was Colgate University in upstate New York. They were building a new art and design centre, the Dana Centre at their university, and opening a new art gallery, the Picker Art Gallery, in 1966. And so he donated these 122 works along with 1,800 other works from his personal collection from Manhattan as a kind of seed for their new contemporary collection. And when they got to Colgate, I think there was half a dozen of these that were framed, and they just got hung around campus and duly ignored. And the other 116 were still in boxes as they went when they travelled to Colgate in '66, and they just remained in boxes in their storeroom. Then there was an academic from Australia who was a specialist in Aboriginal art who just happened to be there in the art gallery and just happened to be shown this box of Australian drawings. And he just happened to be one of half a dozen people in the world who recognised what they were. That was 2004. So, there was great news out of the New York Times. It was headline news in the New York Times. And then Colgate University set about engineering the conditions where they could repatriate the collection. They recognised quite quickly that it was kind of cultural treasure to Noongar people, and there were delegations from Perth travelling there and after they'd been discovered, and so they set about making the repatriation happen, which took a long time because it's quite difficult to repatriate cultural material, especially out of the US and particularly out of the state of New York. Then in 2012 they were able to do that, and they offered the custodianship to Curtin University, which we gladly accepted because they were a great instrument of kind of redressing histories untold and sadness unknown. So it's been a very profoundly kind of important thing to have happened to the collection here at Curtin University.
So now that the collection is back in Western Australia, what have you been doing with it? Who's been coming to see it?
Well, we've staged, since they first arrived in 2013, we've staged 5 major exhibitions and exhibitions throughout the region. We had a tour trying to take the works back to the places that kind of inform them and where the people live who they're most precious to throughout the Great Southern. In Albany and Koorliny in particular. We've had exhibitions here at the John Curtin Gallery in Perth, and the university has plans to refurbish a good deal of the ground floor of our building, which we're standing in the ground floor at the moment in the storeroom, which will be a dedicated home to the Koorliny collection and enable much greater public access. It'll be a place of research and engagement and education. The university is very busy on many fronts, working towards the ambitions of its Reconciliation Action Plan, and the Koorliny collection has now become a major kind of instrument for the university to engage with the community and use it as a way of engaging with this sort of sad history of the stolen generations.
Now, those kids, the artists of these drawings, back in the 1940s, are any of them still alive?
Well, it's an interesting question. There's only one that we know of. It was a woman at the time known as Alma Kutterbutt. Her name now is Alma Tumarth, and she went on to be a practicing artist throughout her whole life. And we only discovered her as being, at the moment, officially the only living Koorliny artist. The last one that we knew of passed away in 2010, Milton Jackson, and only in doing conservation on one of the works about a year ago we discovered that Alma Kutterbutt was identified as the artist of one of the artworks, because of the 122 artworks we only know by name 17 of the children, so there's a lot more research to be done, and we had planned and do plan to take an exhibition to London in 2021, and the aim of that is to try to uncover some of the 1,000 odd that were sent to London that were exhibited throughout the UK that ended up in private or public collections that we expect people don't really understand what they are, where they're from, what their significance is, and so we're hoping to find more works to hopefully identify more children, because the value, as I see it, the principal value of these works' existence is the connection that it has with living descendants and families of these children, and that has profound impact upon the extended families of their descendants. And so if we can find more works and identify more children, or even be able to undertake the research to identify who these children are, all of these children, that would be of tremendous benefit to Aboriginal people in Western Australia.
Because they were just tiny little things when they drew these. They're quite sophisticated works for the age of the children.
They are. They're extraordinary, and everybody, and we have thousands of visitors in here every year, and everybody's astounded that these were works by children. And I mean, that kind of reaction was the same in 1950 and 1951 and throughout the 1940s. When they were sent to London, they were exhibited in London. I mean, people there were kind of astonished that these were done by children. And that was from the very first time they were seen in 1946. The teacher took some to the agricultural show at Koorliny, 3 months after he arrived there, so they were the very first works that the children drew. And when they were shown at the it's like our equivalent of the Royal Show, the agricultural show in October in '46, nobody believed that they were done by children. So the teacher, Noel White, used to bring children along to make them demonstrate that they were actually doing them, which is kind of sad in some way, but it was also a great way of the children becoming very confident and sort of really built self-esteem in terms of them being recognised for doing something positive, because during the 1940s and 50s and even 60s, I mean, Aboriginal people suffered great injustice and prejudice in society, and so for children to be producing artworks in school and being recognised outside of the context of school, I think seemed to inject a sense of confidence and almost a sense of future in some of the children, which sadly was extinguished when the school was closed through political wrangling between the Education Department and the Department for Native Affairs in 1950.
So how old were these children?
No child could be at Koorliny after they turned 14. So the oldest children who did any of these drawings were 13. 13 years and 9 months seemed to be a cut-off date where the girls would then either be sent off to agencies to be placed into domestic service, or the boys were just shown the door. I mean, they just had to sort of walk off the settlement site and go and find work somewhere. And that was, that was a varying success. Sadly, a lot of the young men, as young adults, spent a lot of time in and out of prison, not for criminal behaviour, although in some ways, retrospectively, it was criminal behaviour according to the government of the day. For an Aboriginal person to be out of curfew or in the wrong place at the wrong time, you would just be automatically thrown into prison. So there were very unequal kind of rights for Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people. And the sad irony was that Noel White, the teacher who set up a school in the Fremantle prison in 1961, had contact again with a lot of these young men who by that stage had spent years in and out of prison. And it was much, they were very ashamed of the fact that they hadn't taken up the opportunities that they could see and feel when they were at Koorliny. And it wasn't Noel White's fault, it wasn't their fault, it was just circumstance that the place was shut down. But it was very, very sad that a lot of these men who could have gone on to be very successful professional artists ended up living very short, tragic lives. And a lot of them persevered, and I mean the spark of creating artwork that was lit within the school, some of them persevered in incredibly difficult circumstances in their young adult lives to continue. And there's generations of Noongar artists in particular who have been kind of inspired by their tenacity, not only out of prison but also within prison. I mean, the Koorliny style, as so called, is a kind of idealised Noongar Budja landscape that was prevalent throughout the prison system in the 60s and 70s, not only from these boys in particular who were at Koorliny in the 1940s, but just through sharing that kind of that dedication to memorialising Noongar Budja while they're in prison was shared amongst other Aboriginal prisoners. I mean, people who hadn't been at Koorliny. And so it became kind of disseminated throughout the community, sort of more widely and appreciated in a way. So it kind of lived on through prisons, which is, I mean, it's an awful truth, but that's what happened.
And if you would like to see yourself these wonderful works of art, then jump onto the John Curtin Gallery website or their Facebook page to book a tour. It happens once a month. This is Jane Heberton reporting for WTV.